It's a great pleasure to welcome to the program today Daniel Dennett, philosopher, cognitive scientist known for his work on consciousness, evolution, the philosophy of mind. His latest book, I've Been Thinking, is a memoir that reflects on his career and ideas. So great having you on. I really do appreciate your time.
Well, I'm delighted to be with you.
Maybe to start with, because it's so topical, you've increasingly talked about artificial intelligence. Some of your concerns are interesting to me because they're not the generic, often repeated ones that are often portrayed right now in popular culture. So let me just open it up to you generally. What do you think about the technology? What do you see as the more interesting upsides? But what are your concerns?
Well, my biggest concern is that people are looking too far ahead. People who are worried about robots taking over and enslaving us in the 20 years or 30 years or 10 years, we've got a problem right now. I mean, it may even be too late, and that's what we have to work on. And that's the problem of counterfeit people. The large language models, the chat GPTs and their kin, are extremely valuable and fascinating. In fact, their fascination is part of the problem. They are poised to manipulate us into reproducing them in large numbers. They are capable of evolving on their own, and we will have created a species of parasitical informational objects that can, one, destroy trust, two, and thereby destroy civilization. We depend on being able to trust each other, and democracy depends on truth. Truth is under great pressure these days from many quarters, left and right. And the Microsoft's top scientist spoke in a talk of the post-epistemic world, the world after knowledge.
Mm.
That is a scenario of great disaster, and it's going to take fast and intelligent action to forestall that.
When you say counterfeit people, I talk a little bit about exactly what you mean. I think many of us saw, for example, the robocall that went out in New Hampshire last month. It sounded like Joe Biden. It turned out it was an AI generated clone of Joe Biden. Is that the sort of thing you're talking about?
That's the sort of thing, but it's going to come in many flavors. First of all, that example nicely shows that it doesn't have to be written, it can be spoken. We've got voice technology now that can mimic a voice. We're sort of leaving the age of photographic evidence and video evidence, because all of these things can be now reproduced by AI. And it means that we've lost one of our main tools and checkpoints for establishing truth with evidence. That's extremely worrying.
As someone who has read so much of your work over the decades, I'm curious how AI and technology and sort of the state of affairs in 2024 is or isn't making you maybe rethink or add to some of your other areas that you've written about. I'll give you an example. When you published Breaking the Spell almost 20 years ago, 95% of Americans said they believed in God, according to Pew. That's down dramatically to 81% today. The number of people who are part of what we might call organized religion or regularly attend places of worship, it's down. The US is becoming a far less religious society for sure. How do you think of, over the last 20 years, the evolution of what was called the New Atheist Movement, you, Hitchens, Dawkins, and Harris? How do you think AI and similar technology may modulate or influence that?
Oh, that's a good question. First of all, I think the new atheists do get some credit for getting people who are atheists to come out of the closet. Uh, and people now realize there are many more of us than they thought, and we vote. And that's a good thing. So in general, I am pleased to see that just what I said would happen is happening. And if you look at the last chapter or so of Breaking the Spell, you'll see that my recommendation is to go slow, to go careful, to recognize that this is going to be heart-wrenching for a lot of people as they see their traditions ebb and erode in front of their eyes, as they see the great change happening. A lot of people are going to be very hurt, and some of them are going to be very angry. And that's what we're now seeing. We're seeing people who are quite desperate to retain their traditional ways, and they're not winning, they're losing, and they're beginning to grasp at straws. Their children, it takes 20 years to raise a Baptist and 20 minutes to lose one. The Baptist Church, Southern Baptists, very worried that the children of their members are not becoming, Bible believing Baptists. So the secularization of America, long overdue, is happening apace now, but it's not a process without significant pain and anguish and danger. And we're facing that danger right now in a big way. Did AI have anything to do with it? Yes, in fact, it did. Deb Roy and I published a piece in the Scientific American some years ago called on our Transparent Future, which talked about how technology was changing the very nature of our epistemic environment. It was, on the one hand, giving us much more access to internal, state secrets, as it were, and corporate secrets. It's much harder to keep a secret now than it used to be. And this is a fundamental change in the epistemic landscape. And we warned in that piece that institutions that don't evolve quickly to deal with this new transparency are doomed. And we see this happening on many fronts. We see the erosion of trust in news. We see many lawsuits having to do with who's lying to whom about what. We're undergoing a revolution in who knows what. Now, a lot of this is good. The cell phones that can record the atrocities of a police attacking protesters and get those online immediately, that's power to the people.
Right.
But the state has power too, and evil actors and corporations. We're entering a Wild West period where there's an awful lot of informational weaponry out there, and people are learning to use it.
There was a point in your career where you were criticized more regularly for being, and I quote, too hostile towards religion, and that even among those who agree with your perspective, that it may be more effective to be less hostile, whatever it is that people mean. I'm curious now, looking back at the phase during which that was a criticism you received. What do you think about the attitude and approach that you took? Was it effective?
I think it was. I I cherish the emails and letters that I got from people who read Breaking the Spell just to know the enemy and were convinced. And switch sides and glorify in the fact that I set them free. So I got some of that mail, and so did the other so-called four horsemen of the new atheism. We did clear the air for a lot of people who needed to know that there were others who were willing to talk out on these matters. I'm often quoted as saying there's no polite way of telling somebody they've wasted their life on an illusion.
Right.
But in fact, what I wrote was there's no polite way of asking someone to consider whether they've wasted their life on an illusion, which is what I did.
What do you, oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Consider it, and a lot of people said, yes, you're right.
What do you, let's see how I can frame this most appropriately. Sometimes there are individuals, the podcast host Joe Rogan, for example, and we talk about that on today's show, who say, whether or not you believe in the specifics of what the Bible teaches or the story about Jesus or Muhammad or whatever, going back a layer from that, humans have a need for something like a sacred religious type belief, and there's no good substitute for it. Now, I happen to believe at a personal level that understanding the vastness and duration of the universe and the unlikely odds that I would end up being who I am and doing what I do, that in itself, to me, serves as a pretty inspirational and motivating framework. That's a perfectly good substitute for organized religion. But I'm curious your perspective now on that argument that religion provides something uniquely useful that nothing else can provide.
Well, I agree with you 100% that we can follow Spinoza and just say God or nature. Nature is flipping wonderful. It's breathtaking. The more we learn about it, the more wonderful it appears. Much more dazzling, much more worthy of respect and just gobsmacking wonder than, gods riding fiery chariots or sitting in a celestial throne. I think, but a lot of people want something simpler. And I think that's too bad. I think we can bide our time. I like to point out that my grandchildren, grade schoolers, they understand things easily that the geniuses of my parents' generation couldn't understand. Don't suppose that the ability to take in the mind-boggling scientific advances of this era, don't suppose that that's out of reach of everyday people who are not themselves scientists. It is if we do the job right. Now, but there is one thing that religion provides, which the state doesn't provide, and I think shouldn't provide. And that is, well, my way of getting at it is to quote a line from a poem by Robert Frost. And the line is, home is where, when you have to go there, they have to take you in. And I think this openness of church communities to take in the people who otherwise don't have a home. I mean, there's a lot of people that are homeless in this sense, in Frost's sense. Nobody loves them. Nobody loves them. And That's a terrible state to be in. And only non-governmental institutions, communities, organizations can provide that uplift, that cocooning, that gentle welcoming, open and affirming, as some Protestant churches say. Come, join. We don't care what you believe. You can just be a part of our community. I think that's wonderful.
Mm.
And I think if we lose that, we leave an awful lot of people with a lot of anguish and a lot of loneliness. And it's a tightrope act, because that attitude excuses failure. It doesn't require you to be really good at anything. You can be quite incompetent, but still be supported and loved by your neighbors in such a group. But there have to be people in the organization that know enough to keep it from going off the rails. And I'm not sure that these groups can hold the allegiance of the people they need to hold the allegiance of, to be maintained as a normal part of everyday towns and cities and rural areas. That's a tough one.
Very, very well said. We've been speaking with Daniel Dennett. His latest book is I've Been Thinking. It's a memoir reflecting on his career and ideas. I really appreciate your time today, and so great to speak with you.
Well, thank you very much. I've enjoyed the questions, as you can see, and I'm happy you asked them, and I'm happy that I was able to answer them.